What would you do if the man you loved slapped you in front of 300 wedding guests on what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life? Jasmine Washington never imagined that her fairy tale wedding in Atlanta would become a public nightmare of racism, betrayal, and humiliation that would leave her standing alone at the altar of her own dignity. But sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the doorway to discovering who we really are, and Jasmine was about to find out just how powerful she could be. If you love interesting stories like this that expose the truth, please give this video a thumbs up, and tell us in the comments section where in the world you are watching this video, and also do well to smash that subscribe button. The morning sun streamed through the silk curtains of a luxury bridal suite at the Grand Plaza Hotel in downtown Atlanta. The golden light danced across the marble floors and crystal fixtures, creating a scene that should have been magical. But for Jasmine Washington, standing before the ornate mirror in her stunning white gown, magic felt like the furthest thing from reality. Her dress was a masterpiece, flowing silk with delicate pearls sewn into intricate patterns that caught the light like tiny stars. The dress had cost more than most people's cars, a wedding gift from her future mother-in-law that came with strings attached. Jasmine ran her hands over the smooth fabric, trying to calm the storm brewing in her chest. "Girl, you are absolutely glowing," her best friend Keisha exclaimed, stepping back to admire her. "When Derek sees you walking down that aisle, I swear that man is going to fall flat on his face. You look like royalty, Jazz. Like actual royalty." Jasmine tried to smile, but the expression felt forced and unnatural. Usually, Keisha's enthusiasm could lift her spirits no matter how low she felt. Her best friend since childhood had always been her anchor, her voice of reason, her partner in crime. But today, even Keisha's infectious energy couldn't break through the wall of dread that had been building since yesterday's rehearsal dinner. The rehearsal at St. Mark's Cathedral had been tense and uncomfortable. Derek, her fiancé of 2 years, had seemed distant and distracted throughout the entire evening. His mother, Margaret Hamilton, had made her disapproval crystal clear with every passive-aggressive comment and thinly veiled insult. The Hamilton family was old money from Buckhead, Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhood, and they had never quite accepted that their golden boy was marrying a black woman from the West End. "Jasmine," Keisha's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Honey, you've been staring at yourself in that mirror for 10 minutes straight. Talk to me. What's going on in that beautiful head of yours?" Jasmine turned away from her reflection, her stomach churning with anxiety. "I'm scared, Keisha. I'm terrified that this whole day is going to be a disaster." "What are you talking about? This is your fairy tale wedding. The venue is gorgeous, the flowers are perfect, and you're marrying the man you love. What could possibly go wrong?" Jasmine sank into the velvet armchair by the window, her dress pooling around her like a cloud. "It's Margaret, and Derek's whole family, really. Last night at dinner, I felt like I was sitting at a table full of strangers who were just waiting for me to mess up, to prove that I don't belong." Keisha's expression hardened. She had witnessed the Hamilton family's subtle racism firsthand during the engagement party 6 months ago. "Jazz, you cannot let that woman get in your head. Not today. This is your day. You deserve to be happy. But what if Derek isn't ready to stand up to her? What if he chooses his family over me?" The words tumbled out before Jasmine could stop them, voicing the fear that had been eating at her for weeks. Before Keisha could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Keisha walked over and opened the door to reveal Derek standing in the hallway, looking impossibly handsome in his custom-made black tuxedo. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his blue eyes were bright with what looked like nervous energy. "You know it's supposed to be bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony, right?" Keisha said, crossing her arms and blocking the doorway like a protective guardian. Derek flashed his $1,000,000 smile, the same one that had first caught Jasmine's attention at that charity gala 3 years ago. "I'll take my chances. I just need to talk to Jasmine for a minute. Alone? Keisha looked back at Jasmine, who nodded reluctantly. Fine, but you have exactly 5 minutes before I come back in here. And Derek, if you upset her, I will personally hunt you down and make your life miserable. Derek chuckled nervously as Keisha left, closing the door behind her with a pointed slam. The silence that followed felt heavy and uncomfortable. Nothing like the easy conversation they used to share when they first started dating. You look incredible, Derek said softly, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. Absolutely breathtaking. Thank you, Jasmine replied, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Derek, what's wrong? I can tell something's bothering you. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly, a nervous habit she had come to recognize over the years. It's about some of the ceremony details. My mother has some concerns. Jasmine's heart sank. What kind of concerns? Well, the jumping the broom tradition that you wanted to include. Derek's voice trailed off, and he couldn't quite meet her eyes. What about it? Jasmine's voice was barely above a whisper, but she could feel her chest tightening with each word. My mother thinks it might be inappropriate for our wedding. She's worried it doesn't fit with the elegant atmosphere we've created. She thinks our guests might not understand the tradition, and it could make them uncomfortable. The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Jumping the broom was a beautiful African-American tradition that represented the joining of two families, the sweeping away of the old life, and the beginning of something new. It was meaningful to her family, to her heritage. It was one of the few personal touches she had been allowed to include in what had become Margaret Hamilton's vision of the perfect wedding. Inappropriate, Jasmine repeated, her voice sharp with hurt and disbelief. Derek, this tradition is part of who I am. It's part of my culture, my history. How can you ask me to remove it from our wedding? Derek stepped closer, his tone becoming pleading and desperate. Come on, Jazz. Don't let this ruin everything. It's just one small thing. We can find other ways to honor your heritage without making waves. This day is supposed to be perfect. Jasmine stared at him, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the man she was about to marry. Perfect for whom, Derek? Perfect for your mother? Perfect for your family's image? Or perfect for us? That's not fair, Derek said, his voice rising slightly. You know how important this wedding is. My family has connections, business associates coming. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is covering it. We can't afford any complications. The word complications hung in the air like poison. Jasmine realized with crystal clarity that to Derek and his family, her culture, her traditions, her very identity were nothing more than complications to be managed and minimized. I'll see you at the altar, Derek said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. The gesture felt cold and performative, nothing like the passionate, loving kisses they used to share. We'll talk about this later, okay? As soon as the door closed behind him, Jasmine collapsed back into the chair, her hands shaking with rage and heartbreak. Keisha burst back into the room as if she had been listening at the door, which she probably had been. What did that fool say to you? Keisha demanded, taking one look at Jasmine's devastated expression. Nothing, Jasmine whispered, tears threatening to spill down her carefully made-up cheeks. It's fine. Everything's fine. But nothing was fine. As Jasmine stood at the back of St. Mark's Cathedral an hour later, waiting for the organ music to begin, she felt like she was walking toward her own funeral instead of her wedding day. The cathedral was magnificent, with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast rainbow light across the white flowers and silk ribbons. 300 guests filled the pews, the cream of Atlanta society dressed in their finest attire. Her father, Robert Washington, stood beside her looking proud and dignified in his rented tuxedo. He was a hard-working man who had built his own construction company from nothing, and seeing his daughter marry into one of Atlanta's most prominent families filled him with both pride and concern. "You ready, princess?" he asked gently, offering his arm. Jasmine nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. As they began the long walk down the aisle, she noticed the subtle but unmistakable division in the seating. Derek's side was filled with pale faces, designer clothes, and carefully controlled expressions. Her side was a beautiful mix of colors and textures, her family and friends radiating genuine warmth and love. At the altar, Derek waited with his groomsmen, all blonde and blue-eyed copies of each other in their matching tuxedos. His smile was perfect, practiced, the same smile he used for business meetings and charity photos. Margaret Hamilton sat in the front row wearing cream-colored silk, an expression of barely concealed distaste. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly on the surface. The minister spoke about love and commitment, while Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs. The vows were exchanged with picture-perfect precision, every word carefully rehearsed and approved by Derek's family. When it came time for the traditional, "if anyone objects" moment, Jasmine found herself almost hoping someone would speak up, would give her a reason to stop this madness. But the cathedral remained silent, and the ceremony continued its inevitable march toward completion. When Derek kissed her at the end, the applause was polite and restrained, nothing like the joyful celebration she had always imagined for her wedding day. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Jasmine caught Margaret's eye. The older woman's gaze was cold, calculating, and completely devoid of any maternal warmth or acceptance. It was a look that said clearly, "You may have married my son, but you will never be part of this family." The reception at the Atlanta History Center was a masterpiece of elegant excess. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in white linens and gold accents. The flowers alone had cost more than most people's annual salary, and the open bar served top-shelf liquor to guests who were already drunk on their own self-importance. But for all its beauty, the reception felt like a performance rather than a celebration. Derek spent most of the evening glued to his phone, texting his business partners and checking social media coverage of the wedding. His publicist, a sharp woman named Victoria who had mysteriously appeared on the guest list at the last minute, hovered nearby providing updates on the media response. "Baby, you okay?" Jasmine's mother, Sharon Washington, appeared at her side with concern written across her face. "You look like you're about to collapse." "I'm fine, Mama," Jasmine lied, forcing another fake smile. "Just overwhelmed by everything." Sharon squeezed her daughter's hand. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart. Don't let anyone dim your light today. This is your moment." But even as her mother spoke those loving words, Jasmine could feel her light fading with each passing hour. When the DJ announced their first dance, she had to search the room to find Derek, who was at the bar deep in conversation with some business associates. "It's time," she said quietly, touching his arm. "Right, sorry," Derek muttered, barely looking at her as he pocketed his phone. They moved to the center of the dance floor as the opening notes of their song began to play. It was supposed to be their special moment, the first dance as husband and wife that they would remember forever. But Derek's movements were stiff and mechanical, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, as if he were performing for the cameras rather than dancing with the woman he claimed to love. Jasmine tried to lose herself in the music, to recapture some of the magic she had felt when they first danced to this song in Derek's apartment 2 years ago. But the intimacy was gone, replaced by the cold reality of what their marriage had become before it had even truly begun. As the song ended and the guests applauded, Margaret Hamilton rose from her seat at the head table. Jasmine's stomach dropped as she realized Derek's mother was about to give a speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret began, her voice carrying clearly through the elegant reception hall, "I want to take a moment to talk about my son Derek." The room fell silent, all attention focused on the impeccably dressed woman at the microphone. Margaret's smile was sharp as a knife's edge as she continued. Derek has always been a generous boy, always thinking of others less fortunate than himself. From the time he was small, he brought home stray animals, donated his allowance to charity, and looked out for those who needed help. Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face as she began to understand where this speech was heading. And now, true to form, Derek has extended that same generous spirit to his choice of bride. It takes a special kind of man to look beyond differences and see the potential for improvement in others. The insult was delivered with such sugary sweetness that it took a moment for some guests to fully process what had been said. But Jasmine heard every word with crystal clarity, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. She looked at Derek, waiting for him to stand up, to defend her, to show some backbone against his mother's racist attack. But Derek sat frozen, staring down at his untouched dinner plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. The humiliation burned through Jasmine like acid. She could feel the eyes of 300 guests on her, some shocked, some embarrassed, some nodding in agreement with Margaret's assessment. Her own family looked horrified, her mother's face a mask of barely controlled rage. But the worst part was Derek's silence, his complete and utter failure to defend the woman he had just promised to love and protect for the rest of his life. The rest of Margaret's speech was a blur of veiled insults and backhanded compliments, each one designed to put Jasmine in her place while maintaining plausible deniability. When she finally sat down, the applause was scattered and uncomfortable, like the sound of rain on a tin roof. Dinner was served, but Jasmine couldn't eat a bite. Her stomach churned with a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and instead it had become a public humiliation orchestrated by her new mother-in-law and enabled by her husband's cowardice. When it came time for the cake cutting, another tradition that should have been sweet and joyful, Margaret struck again. As the photographer positioned them for pictures, she made another pointed comment about how Jasmine's family had contributed so little to the wedding expenses, implying that the Washingtons were nothing more than charity cases being supported by Hamilton generosity. This time, Jasmine's composure finally shattered. "Derek," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion, "are you seriously going to let her talk about my family like that? Are you going to say anything at all?" Derek sighed heavily, as if her pain was nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. "Not now, Jasmine. Please don't make a scene. We can talk about this later." "Make a scene?" Jasmine repeated, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Your mother has been insulting me and my family all day, and you're worried about me making a scene? Just keep your voice down," Derek hissed, glancing around at the guests who were beginning to stare. "You're embarrassing yourself." And then it happened. In his frustration and desperation to silence her, Derek raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the reception hall like a gunshot. The music stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. 300 guests turned to stare at the bride standing at the cake table with a red handprint blooming across her dark cheek. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Jasmine touched her face, feeling the sting of the slap mingling with the deeper ache of complete and utter betrayal. In that instant, she saw her future with perfect clarity. Years of being diminished, dismissed, and disrespected while Derek stood by and watched it happen. Slowly, with all the dignity she could muster, Jasmine turned to face the crowd. Her voice was steady and clear as she spoke, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to witness what was supposed to be the beginning of my new life. Instead, you've seen the end of my old one. This wedding is over." Without another word, without looking back at Derek or his family, Jasmine walked out of the reception hall. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a metronome, counting down the seconds until her freedom. Outside, the cool Atlanta night air hit her like a blessing. She stood on the steps of the Atlanta History Center, still in her thousands of dollars wedding dress, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time all day. Keisha found her there moments later, still in her bridesmaid dress, but with her shoes in her hand and fire in her eyes. "Jazz! Oh my God, are you okay?" Keisha wrapped her arms around her best friend, holding her tight as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. "I'm better than okay," Jasmine said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm free." Behind them, they could hear the chaos erupting in the reception hall as guests tried to process what they had witnessed. Derek's voice carried through the night air, calling her name with panic and desperation that came far too late. "You don't have to go back in there," Keisha said firmly. "We can get your things later. Right now, we're getting you out of here." As they walked away from the venue together, Jasmine felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest all day was finally lifting, replaced by a sense of possibility and hope. The next morning, Jasmine woke up on Keisha's couch in her friend's Midtown apartment, still wearing her wedding dress like a beautiful white flag of surrender. Her phone was buzzing with dozens of missed calls and text messages from Derek, Margaret, and various wedding guests, but she ignored them all. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. With the help of her family and friends, Jasmine began the process of untangling her life from Derek's. She moved her belongings out of their shared penthouse in Buckhead, filed for an annulment, and started looking for her own place in a neighborhood where she could be herself without apology. Derek's attempts to contact her grew increasingly desperate as the reality of losing her began to sink in. He sent flowers, jewelry, handwritten letters promising to change, to stand up to his mother, to be the husband she deserved. But Jasmine had heard his promises before, and she had learned the hard way that actions meant more than words. Margaret Hamilton, meanwhile, launched a campaign of character assassination designed to paint Jasmine as an opportunistic gold digger who had trapped her son into marriage. But Jasmine had allies in Atlanta's black community, successful businesspeople and community leaders who knew her worth and were more than willing to set the record straight. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, Jasmine started a blog called Dignity Over Everything. She wrote about her experience with unflinching honesty, sharing the story of racism, betrayal, and ultimately self-respect that had defined her wedding day. The blog went viral within weeks, resonating with women around the world who had faced similar choices between love and self-worth. "Love isn't about sacrifice," she wrote in her most popular post. "Love isn't about making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. Real love lifts you up, celebrates who you are, and protects you from those who would tear you down. I thought I was giving up my fairy tale when I walked away from that altar. But I was wrong. I was just making room for a better story." 6 months later, Jasmine opened her own event planning business, specializing in culturally authentic weddings and celebrations. Her first client was a young black couple who wanted to incorporate African traditions into their ceremony without apology or compromise. As Jasmine helped them plan their jumping the broom ceremony, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. A year after the wedding disaster, Derek's attempts to contact her had finally stopped. She heard through mutual acquaintances that he had married someone else, a blonde debutante from an old Georgia family who fit perfectly into Margaret's vision of the ideal daughter-in-law. Jasmine felt nothing but pity for the woman who would now have to navigate the minefield of Hamilton family expectations and prejudices. As for Jasmine herself, she was thriving. Her business was successful, her blog had turned into a book deal, and she had started dating again. This time with clear boundaries and non-negotiable standards for how she expected to be treated. Standing in her own apartment in Virginia Highland, surrounded by artwork that celebrated her heritage and books that fed her soul, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The girl who had once been willing to compromise her identity for acceptance was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and refused to settle for anything less than complete respect and genuine love. Her wedding day had indeed been a nightmare, but it had also been a gift. It had shown her exactly who Derek really was beneath his charming exterior, and more importantly, it had shown her who she could become when she chose dignity over desperation. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having your worst fears come true, because it forces you to discover just how strong you really are. Jasmine Washington had walked away from her fairy tale wedding and found something much better: herself. The story of that dramatic wedding day in Atlanta became legend in certain circles, a cautionary tale about the importance of choosing partners who will stand with you against the world rather than asking you to stand alone. And every time Jasmine told her story, whether in her writing or in person, she ended with the same message. Never let anyone convince you that you are asking for too much when you ask to be treated with basic human dignity. Your culture, your traditions, your identity, these are not complications to be managed. They are gifts to be celebrated. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve a place in your life, no matter how much you think you love them. Years later, when Jasmine finally did walk down the aisle again, this time to a man who cherished every part of who she was, she jumped the broom with pride, surrounded by people who celebrated her joy without reservation. It was everything her first wedding should have been. A true celebration of love, respect, and the unbreakable power of choosing yourself when the world asks you to be smaller. Her nightmare had become her greatest triumph, and her story continued to inspire others to choose dignity over everything else, no matter the cost.